Our theme this month is intention. And in Unitarian Universalist circles, a lot of times when we talk about intention, we're talking about being mindful, we're talking about having intent on what our actions are, and so not doing things without forethought. It fits into our very heady mind religion in that way, and that we're thinking about who we are and the world we want to create, and we're acting with purpose. I'm going to argue another side of the coin about intention today and talk about the difference between intent and impact. So imagine a situation. You say something. Someone else perceives it as racist. You didn't intend for it to be. In fact, you can argue it wasn't racist at all. What do? Do you, A, call the person a precious snowflake and accuse them of being overly sensitive and politically correct? Okay, maybe not. Do you, B, explain rationally and logically that this wasn't your intent, giving the etymology of the words you used to show that they weren't in fact racist at all? Or do you, C, apologize for the impact your words caused and try to learn why they seemed harmful, hurtful, so that you can avoid them in the future? All right, sounds like you're on a good track there. So let's make it a little bit more concrete with some examples. Example A is one that happened in the political world in 1999. You use the word niggardly. Now, niggardly, and you use it to refer to an African-American colleague. Now, the word niggardly, etymologically, is not at all related to the word Niger, from which we get the words like the French noir and the Spanish negro, meaning black or dark, as well as similar racial epithets. It's a completely unrelated word. Niggardly comes from the Old English Nigen, related to the Old Norse nigla, which means to fuss about small matters. So you know you're right. You weren't being racist at all. Do you go with the A, you're a liberal snowflake, an overly sensitive option? Do you go with the B, let me explain why you're wrong and I wasn't racist and you were overly sensitive option? Or do you go with the I'm sorry, let me try to understand why that was hurtful option? Here's a slightly different example. Example B. This one's the plot of a Philip Roth book. You use the word spook to refer to an African-American student. You meant that they were like a ghost disappearing from class and had completely forgotten about the way spook was used as a racially charged term. Liberal snowflake? Let me explain? Apologize. Example C is physical, but the hurt is still psychological. And this has happened numerous times, such as last year in Savannah, Georgia. You want to create a creepy Halloween scene in your yard. You make bodies crawling out of the ground, dismembered parts with a chainsaw on your porch, and you hang stuffed bodies from your tree. A neighbor explains, that looks like a lynching, and complains. Do you go with A, liberal snowflake? B, that's not what I intended, so clearly it's not racist? Or C, let me apologize, take it down? Our last example is D. You accidentally blurt out an actually racist term when talking to a friend. You knew it was racist the second you said it. And you didn't intend to say it, and it just popped out, and your friend is offended. Do you A, tell them they're overly sensitive because clearly you didn't mean it? B, tell them that this isn't really you didn't really mean it, and explain how you're not a racist? Or C, apologize profusely, vow to work harder on your underlying racism so that it doesn't happen again. You're all with me. I don't need the rest of the sermon, really, but I'm going to go on anyway. Clearly, most of us are not going with that liberal snowflake option. But that is where the large part of our culture is responding from these days. The term snowflake has reached great acceptance. I saw a little video where Kellyanne Conway called people snowflakes for being offended at something that the president had said. It's, all over Breitbart, liberal snowflakes object to this, liberal snowflakes object to that, You can find memes, snowflake memes, about how we're so sensitive. We're hurt by the littlest things. And we're just whiny babies because we complain about racism and sexism in the world. And they take an example and push it to the nth degree of how could anyone possibly be offended by this. Now, from the perspective of the person committing the action that is seen to cause harm, you might say that all of these examples were the same because no harm was intended. Or as a liberal, you might say, well, I can see that although my intentions were good, I did cause some harm through my ignorance of the word spook. But that person was just plain wrong about niggardly. Don't they understand that that has a completely different word origin? But from the perspective of the person receiving harm, all of these caused harm, regardless of my intention in saying them. In circles where people are working on anti-racism, we're now talking about the difference between intent and impact. Because oftentimes when white folks are in a situation where racism is felt and perceived, we start talking about our intent being pure. And it's easy to understand why we do this. We're very good at doing it, even when it's not us where the example is taking place. We want to examine it. We want to say, wait a second, you say that something racist happened, but let me examine that. Let me understand it. And then I will explain to you how that person didn't really intend racism. You see, they weren't really racist. Because for us, it is so hard. For us, when I say us, I mean me and people like me, white liberals. It is really, really hard to be considered a racist. It hurts, and it's scary. In some conditions, it may threaten our job or our livelihood to be called a racist, and we don't want that term applied to us because it's at odds with our self-image. It creates cognitive dissonance when you call me a racist. And so we defend, and we deflect, and we push away. But one of the things that does is it changes the whole narrative of the story. From, hey, I was hurt, to, hey, I was hurt when you said you were hurt. Let's talk about my feelings and understand that I am okay. And what happened to this person over here who was hurt? They've been shut out of the conversation entirely. We've moved it from black hurts to white hurts in that action of moving from impact to intent. We do this, of course, in the context of other isms as well, whether it's sexism or homophobia or whatever. But for right now, I'm talking from the perspective of racism, and I know you can extrapolate from there. So here's a very different, because it's a physical example of hurt. This is an example from an article by someone named Jennifer Harvey in the Huffington Post. She's the author of a book titled Raising White Kids, Bringing Up Children in a Racially Unjust America. You accidentally put your hand on the stove. You get burned. You didn't mean to. Do you, A, call yourself a liberal snowflake for feeling hurt? No. Do you, B, explain why you didn't mean it? Or do you, C, seek treatment for the injury? Jennifer Harvey in her HuffPost article explains, have you ever touched a hot stove? Did you do it on purpose? Probably not. Did you get burned anyway? I bet you did. Then you know firsthand that intent is irrelevant to impact. It's taken me a long time to learn this, she says, so I'll say it again. Intent and impact have almost nothing to do with one another. Just ask anyone who has ever unintentionally put her hand on a hot stove. Unfortunately, she continues, those of us who are white usually confuse the two. The familiar conversation goes like this. 1, incident happens. 2, people of color cry foul and describe in painful, often eloquent detail the effects of the incident. 3, white people respond, often defensive, insisting that motives were pure or at least can't be proven malicious. She says, I totally get why we do this. We know racism is bad. And when people of color describe its horrific effects, we become frantic, trying to show that we, or those whose jokes we laughed at, or at least didn't think were that bad, couldn't possibly be associated with it. I get it. So this is me jumping in here, and then I'll continue with more from that article. So Harvey is saying we minimize the impact of racism because we're liberal. This is almost something liberals do more. It's back to Martin Luther King saying the white moderate is more difficult to deal with than the outright racist. Because we really don't want to be racist, and we really, really don't intend it. We know it's bad, we don't want to be associated with it. Therefore, because of that, we're more likely to, when we actually do something wrong, which we do along and along, we want to explain it away. Our intent matters, that racism is something over there. Everything in our faith and our culture and our faith has been set up to tell us that our intent matters. Particularly white people's intent matters. Everything has been set up legally. It matters whether you were planning a murder or just accidentally killed someone. It matters. So our society says intent matters. Culturally, we're told you're only racist if you had racist intent. So our actions can't be racist if we didn't intend racism. That's like the definition of racism for a lot of us, right? Intent matters. So if our churches are unconsciously replicating systems that are racist, or we are in our own lives unconsciously doing something, we lock the doors automatically when a black person walks by, we didn't intend it to be racist, it was unconscious, so that means we can't be racist because we don't intend to be. Everything, our faith doubles this. I said that our faith is responsible for this too because we are a church where the mind is free and we glorify the work of the mind, and we do that over and above. And when we talk about freedoms, we talk about the mind's freedoms, not the body in shackles as much. So there are systems that we've replicated throughout our faith that are racist, and we never intended them to be so. So I'm not saying that you are racist if you've done something hurtful. So first of all, I'm not saying that. So let's set that panic and anxiety about being labeled a racist aside for a moment. I'm saying that when we do something that hurts people, for whatever reason, whether it's racist or hand on a stove, when we do something that's hurtful and it causes hurt, that hurt is real. And we caused it. And the appropriate response is apologizing, learning from it, trying to make amends. So let me continue with more from Jennifer Harvey. She writes, think about it. People of color are talking about harm, the impact of putting your hand on the stove, and white people are talking about motives, whether or not you intended to put your hand on the stove. Now, imagine what it would be like to have a severe burn and be yelling that you need to go to the hospital, only to be met with a numb response, but it was an accident, so surely you can't be burned as badly as you think. And then we sit there, and I'm not talking, she says, about the wee Fox News-loving white folk. I'm talking about the wee, liberal-ish, well-intentioned ones like me, shaking our heads, asking, why are black folks so angry? Whether or not we intended to, our obsession with intent makes the damage worse. End quote. Now, considering impact more important than intent is not going to win you friends in Trump's America right now. We're at a time when considering the impact of racism or sexism or homophobia is more likely to earn you that title of precious snowflake, along with the person who said that they were wronged. Our media and our politicians are often found deriding examples of things where people are caring about the impact on one another, whether it's asking for a trigger warning on a college campus or removing statues from a public park. Addressing the impact is not something we are prepared to do as a culture. So doing this is profoundly countercultural. We want to say, hey, I didn't mean anything racist by flying that Confederate flag, so therefore it's not racist. Anyone who thinks so is overly sensitive. We as a whole culture want to respond that way. Maybe the Confederate flag is too obvious an example for you, but even liberals are prone to falling into this. So they're just too sensitive critique. We also deride political correctness. An example, The UUA this week announced that they have changed the name of Standing on the Side of Love. And they have changed the name of Standing on the Side of Love due to years since it was created of people complaining that standing was ableist language and exclusionary. And so they changed it to Side with Love. That's our official justice campaign now, Side with Love. And if you go to the UUA's Facebook post on this, you will see all these responses of good UUs responding that, hey, people are overly sensitive. People who think that standing means physically standing don't understand the English language and need to have an English lesson. People who think that standing means standing physically and don't understand that it's metaphor need to better understand metaphor. And they are arguing that their intent in loving the Standing on Side of Love message was not ableist, and all those people who were hurt by it are overly sensitive. This is Unitarian Universalism, folks. We're doing it all the time. So, just telling people that they're overly sensitive, calling them snowflake, arguing about intent is a way of gaslighting, which means to tell the person that they are crazy for having the experience they're having. And we do it to the people who are wronged most of all. We tell them they're crazy, we tell them they're overly sensitive, we tell them they just don't understand language, they can't possibly understand, they need to understand our intent and not tell us about their impact. Our world, though, I believe, has enough of people telling people to toughen up, people telling people to not mind the little insults, people telling people that they are just overly sensitive, and we have not enough of sensitivity. We have not enough of the deep caring about impact that we need to have in this world to make it beloved community. So this is what I'm talking about, this Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, this opportunity when situations arise to learn, to grow, to open up, to be vulnerable, to apologize instead of going immediately on the defensive. And it takes a lot of vulnerability to do that, to not white-splain or mansplain or otherwise splain away our actions. The world needs more caring, needs more sensitivity, needs more attention and listening, and not more poo-pooing or being set aside. So, one last thought. For those of you who take this on and who are called snowflake for being sensitive to the needs and issues of others, for fighting for equality, for working to end racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, the political left has come up with a good comeback to that. Yes, I'm a snowflake, and winter